Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to another second channel video. This is going to be a controversial but important one because it involves this region of the Middle East where there is somewhere between 1 and 2 countries. In fact, a few new countries, Ireland, Norway and Spain, have just said that they think there are 2 countries in the area by recognizing a second state. This is a very, very big deal, but why exactly would they decide to do this right now, and why would they bring up the list of countries that do recognize it into this many? It is seriously a large portion of the world. Well, let's talk about international recognition and what it really means, because regardless of which side of this conflict you're on, I think it's interesting to learn more about the state of international recognition, something which is just a given for the vast majority of countries. Whether you love or hate what's happening in Finland, you don't disagree with the existence of Finland, and even in countries where objective atrocities happen, like in Yemen, you don't say that Yemen isn't real, even if you don't like what the Saudis are doing there perhaps. You wouldn't say that Saudi Arabia isn't real. There are lots of countries on the planet, and countries do good or bad things, or realistically good and bad things, but this is something that is just a given, except for the fact that you can't just unilaterally make your own country. Recognition basically exists to say which new countries are and aren't real, and so when a new country says that it forms, like with Kosovo, even when that country has its own government, makes its own currency, although it uses the euro, but a different currency to before, has its own laws and can enforce them, and its own power, and everything else that you need to be a country, if that country didn't seek permission from the territory, from the country that it took the land from, then that becomes a international recognition problem, which is why many countries don't recognize Kosovo. We'll dive into lots of countries that are partially recognized today, but I think it's interesting to say that, yeah, Kosovo might be real in the sense that, like, if you were to try and decide as a person, but on an international level, you have to decide not just what makes sense, but also what helps further your goals as a country and furthers maybe the goal of global peace, which is what people are talking about when it comes to Israel and Palestine. So Ireland, Norway, and Spain have said that they are doing this not as a decision against Israel, but in favor of, in support of peace. This is something that Israel said, we are angry at. They said that this will lead to instability in the region, and even recalling its ambassadors to all 3 countries, they went a step further and they didn't just take their ambassadors home from these 3 places, but they also took the ambassadors of those 3 places to Israel and said that they will be summoned for reprimand talks during which they'll be shown a video of the abduction of female. It makes you sound a little bit crazy when you do that, unless, and this is where the kind of debate comes from, because there are somewhere between 1 and 2 countries. Something I say about this area, because obviously the goal at the start was when they made a new country there to have the existing people also get their own country too. This is something which sort of started to happen, except then didn't, and so Israel is now undoubtedly has its whole own government and infrastructure, but the other country in there, the Palestinian state, is kind of hampered in so many ways. One of those ways is that it's split into 2. One of those places that it's split into 2, the West Bank, then has a lot of places where they don't militarily control it, and the other place has the problem of not being allowed to control its own airports, not being allowed to issue its own internationally recognized passports. They are the largest group of people without a proper, formally recognized state, and as a result, some people call it a prison even, which means that trying to make a country from it is a big nightmare. In fact, it's not only not a country in all of those senses, but they last held an election in 2006 and haven't had one since because of some people that got elected there instead, and so it's a very weird place to try and describe as a functioning country when compared to its neighbor next door, which is why there is some controversy, because the reason that it can't make itself a state, the reason it can't do all of those things, is arguably because of that neighbor. If you were to look at the world right now today and say that was the starting point, you could make a country from these places, you could make it all work, but a lot of people do have the issue of what happened in the past, quite rightfully so. Not just wanting to say, like if you set the starting point as right now, it feels a little unfair to some people, and that is why there is a big debate about who should recognize 1 or 2 of these states. If you were in favor of just recognizing Israel, the most charitable take I could explain is like, well, at right now there is not a state capable of governing itself. One day Israel might be able to help build one, and maybe the world can help to build a place for these people to live where they can have their own government, make their own freedoms, etc. Whereas for the people who recognize Palestine, and maybe not even Israel, their strongest take is like, no, this was all their land at some point. Some people would say they deserve it all, but I think most reasonable people would say this is their land, they deserve the right to do what they want with it. You can't control their airspace, and you can't destroy their airports and decide whether they get passports or not and when they can move in and out of their country, because it's meant to be their country. Give it back to them, which gets really, really messy when you look at the borders between these places and how they split between cities in some places. It gets really messy when you look at the fact that these people were given their own right to elections, and they elected people who then decided decided to suspend elections, it's something that becomes a really big problem, and it's something I want to come back to, but I think ultimately it's just worth saying that lots of countries recognize one or both of these states, and that isn't the bigger objective, that isn't the bigger thing holding back peace, but it is the bigger thing holding back one of these two places from getting their ultimate end goals. If you're Israel, I think the best end state for you in terms of safety is if there was one greater Israel and there was an autonomous Palestinian state inside of it where lots of things were done autonomously and some things were done by Israel as a whole. And if you were Palestine, the ultimate end state would be if you had as much of the historical lands as you could have back, as well as being able to fully control those in any way that an independent country would be able to. But that's what both sides are working towards, and let's compare it to international examples, because when talking about why would both these sides want international recognition, it might be more important to ask the question of what other countries are vying for this too. This is one of the most controversial issues on the planet, so when you're talking about it, you almost have to throw some politically charged language in there, which just isn't useful for learning, which is what I think this channel is all about. And so I figured we should instead talk about places like Kosovo. I briefly went into this earlier, but yeah, Kosovo is not recognized by all the countries in grey, because a lot of the countries in grey say, yeah, you can't just withdraw from a country, you've got to ask their permission and get it granted and have a referendum or something first. And obviously this is something which splits the world almost directly in two. It used to be about a third of the world recognized Kosovo and 2/3 didn't, but it's getting closer and closer to half, which is kind of fun, I guess. Then we could obviously compare this to another spicy take, because have you noticed how this green blob here recognizes Kosovo, but this grey blob doesn't? That's because this whole country is sort of debatably one or the other. So this is one of the interesting maps that you can find on Wikipedia, but I don't think it's very useful for explaining China recognition versus Taiwan. So this is a much more useful map that shows in 1949, the world recognized Taiwan, the People's Republic of China, as the one true China. Both Chinas, Taiwan and China, say that you can't recognize both of us, you have to pick one or the other. And the world said, yeah, this is the rightful government, the people who, used to rule the country before that communist revolution, and only Russia and Mongolia and looks like North Korea kind of disagreed with that, as well as the Eastern Bloc. And then slowly over time, more and more Western nations start to agree that actually, you know what, maybe this People's Republic of China is the one true China. And eventually, as you go through this and you look at the current day, there are 10 countries on Earth that recognize Taiwan, and seriously, it's like some tiny islands in the South Pacific, and it's a few Central American countries who admittedly are countries that have a backbone by saying, yeah, this is objectively there is a Taiwanese state independent to that of China. I think if you were to have a morally consistent stance, you'd say neither country is real or both countries are real. But if you are going to have the stance that most countries have, it's both countries are real, but we'll only officially recognize the one that's worth a little bit more money to us. Because, you can have back-channel recognition to Taiwan. For example, Taiwanese passports are allowed to be used in a lot of the red countries, but it's not true recognition in lots of the ways that matter. So whatever countries are partially recognized, I think these are the big three. These are the big three contentious issues, Kosovo, Taiwan, and Palestine, but they're not the only three. Although I would have to say, if you compare China and Taiwan to that of, Palestine and Israel, China thinks that Taiwan can be a country or whatever, just a country inside of China that is ruled by China with defense done by China, which is kind of similar to what Israel is saying about Palestine. So if you want to have a parallel right there, I think a lot of people who believe in Taiwan would also believe in, I think there's a very interesting, problem with the correlation there. Well, there shouldn't be one, but there sort of is. And so with that said, I think we should now move on to the next fun issue here, because after Taiwan, where else is partially internationally recognized, this is one that you might not think about a lot, but the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, the SADR, the SADRs if you will, that is currently marked on Google Maps as Western Sahara. Morocco says that it's Morocco. And what do the SADRs say? The SADRs say that this is our territory. They believe that it all should belong to them, but they only control the easternmost bits, the least useful bits if we're being totally honest. And so all the countries in green recognize it, all the countries in red tried to recognize it, and then went back on it, because what is the benefit to them of recognizing this conflict? Ultimately, of all the, although Taiwan comes up a lot, Kosovo comes up a lot, And especially if you're having a political debate in your country and you want to distract from the issues that actually affect the people you're voting for, having a big discussion about what you want to do in the Middle East despite having no control there, that is a much more fun way to distract yourself from those things. And so I feel like Western Sahara just doesn't have any of that going for it. It's an important conflict regarding hundreds of thousands of people and their right to self-determination, but it doesn't divide neatly down party lines, so people don't talk about it very much, and so nothing is really being done. And finally, I have one last fun little case, which is obviously the other state which is only partially recognized. Did you know there is this fun place called Israel? Israel, I guess. They must have typoed it right here. So there's this country called Israel, and a lot of places on the planet don't recognize Israel as being a valid place. And I want to talk about this briefly. By the way, did you know North Korea only recognizes Palestine? Why are they involved in that? Is it like a political thing? And this is something I want to say because my personal opinion, I now that we've gone through what I believe to be all the facts as I know them best, my personal opinion after looking at this whole conflict and how it's developed, the one thing that I would say has kind of changed to me as more and more countries recognize Palestine, and it looks like more and more will, is, when I look at this map, I look at it and I say, yeah, the countries in red are being so petty not recognizing Israel. There is clearly an Israeli state there, and the majority of the world agrees on it. Like, what are you achieving by pretending they don't exist? But it's getting closer and closer to that point being true for Palestine, and so I think at some point we have to say, yeah, there is clearly a Palestinian Authority of some control. It might be led by really unsavory people, but there are lots of countries right now that are led by unsavory, non-democratic people, but we wouldn't say they're not countries. Even if you disagree with a country's existence, it doesn't mean that you should pretend it doesn't exist. And that's where I'm starting to lean towards. I don't know what the correct solution for peace is here. If someone could actually, if I could see a time machine into the future and work out what actually would solve this, then I would love for that to be correct and I would be on that side. But in the absence of working out what that is, I think you've just got to say, okay, I guess there's a couple of countries there right now, because maybe it could be true that Israel looks increasingly like it doesn't want to just neutralize the military of this other state that exists there, but potentially always neutralize that military and always not have it truly be independent, which might be a problem if you believe in the right to self-determination, because should the right to self-determination include your right to destroy yourself and other people is a really big question that I don't have an easy answer for. So that's the thing I've been thinking about. The other thing I want to talk about, because I've been working briefly on a video of other places that we almost put Israel, is here's something interesting. The state of Judea, there is a problem with fully, if basically the state of Judea is almost like a threat of the Israeli people living in the West Bank, because the problem with just giving this whole place, the reason it can't just be made independent tomorrow, the reason why any realistic solution takes years and lots of implementation is because lots of settlers from Israel live in the West Bank. A lot of these people did it without Israel's permission, and it makes things a nightmare for Israel. But then these people say, yeah, if you withdraw from the West Bank, if you recognize Palestine, if you say that this is an independent country, then we will withdraw and make our own independent country inside of that independent country, which will be the world's second Jewish state. It's got a flag that looks suspiciously similar to some people, and it's a very interesting idea that I guess Israel has to contend with, is if you are to draw lines, even where they are right now, you end up putting a lot of a lot of your people on the other side of it, which just makes the whole thing messy, and is why if you're a leader in Israel, you just say, yep, we are strong, we are big, and we will fight back against people who hurt us. And why if you're a leader in Palestine, even though what you really need is food, water, job prospects, and all the things that make you that, when someone says we will hurt the people who hurt you, you vote for them anyway. And really, that's the ultimate underlying problem that won't be fixed with recognition anytime too soon. But yeah, I hope that one day it is fixed, and I hope that one day we put this whole thing to bed as being an issue from the past. But knowing how this thing sorts of goes, this could be 5 years time and you can watch this video and it's just gotten worse. I hope that's not true, but what I also hope is that you enjoyed this video, because second channel, don't care. Goodbye. Wait, actually, if you enjoy thoughtful, helpful videos like this one, where I try my best to explain things about just dumping all of my political biases in there, consider supporting over at Patreon. That is a place that exists. It's linked down below. I spend the money on kebabs, not on improving the quality of the channel whatsoever. And yeah, I just as a warning, hope you know, and I hope that you enjoy. I use it to buy, actually, it's not just kebabs. I buy some funky looking drinks and some lobster rolls too, depending on the tier you buy. But yeah, if you want to support the channel, don't buy me a coffee, buy me a kebab. Bye.